and free themselves from oppression. That's according to the leader of the Democratic Alliance, Maimane. He was speaking at the launch of the DA's manifesto at the Rand Stadium in Joburg today. The DA's document focuses on three pillars: the economy, job creation, and creating an opportunity-rich South Africa.
Painting Rand Stadium blue, DA members gathered to launch the party's election manifesto. Maimane says the ANC liberated the country but had forgotten the people due to greed. He says all corrupt politicians should be jailed for no less than 15 years. The party's main focal areas include economic growth, creating jobs and building an opportunity-rich South Africa.
Democrats, the DA brings change that delivers jobs. More recently, the DA took over the metros in Joburg, Tshwane and Nelson Mandela Bay through coalition government. And in a very short space of time, we have started to make a huge difference. Over the past year, Mayor Mashaba's administration has created well over 100,000 jobs in Johannesburg. Hala la Mashaba, hala la!
The DA rejected the ANC and EFF's plan to amend the constitution to allow government to expropriate land without compensation. The party says private property rights are guaranteed.
We don't just oppose the constitution for the sake of it, the amending of the constitution for the sake of it. We want to ensure that Section 25 is protected in the constitution so that our citizens can become owners, not tenants of the state.
Meanwhile, the DA has denied blowing hot and cold over its empowerment policies like broad-based black economic empowerment. Maimane withdrew the party's support for the BBBEE after a meeting with the DA's Federal Council in Cape Town earlier this month. The party says this policy doesn't work in its current form. Abongile Dumako, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, earlier today I was in the Rand Stadium with the SABC's team covering the launch of the DA's election manifesto. The document spells out what it would do if it were to win elections. The DA promises to grow the economy, improve governance, stop expropriation of land without compensation, and to stop corruption. Its manifesto document comes in at 83 pages. To discuss it this evening, we've invited the political analyst Ralph Mathekga and the journalist Ferial Haffajee. Good evening to both of you. Thanks so much for coming in. Let's start with the economy. Obviously, this is a major part of Maimane's speech. He had plenty to say about how the DA would create jobs and grow the economy in South Africa.
We will rebuild our economy by maximizing the sectors that are key to job creation. Sectors like manufacturing, agriculture and tourism. Fellow South Africans, our manifesto will pass the Jobs Act, which will allow for tax incentives for people to come and open businesses that will create jobs. We will ensure that we introduce a year's program where our young people can work for 1 year. We will pay them so that they can learn the skills in government and the dignity to have a job.
Maimane speaking at the DA's election manifesto launch earlier today. Ralph Mathekga, if I can start with you. The DA's policy seems to involve a plan to make it easier for companies to hire and then fire workers. They also seem to say that there should be opt-outs for minimum wages in certain sectors. How do you think that lands with the electorate that the DA is trying to impress?
Well, Stephen, I've heard arguments being made before. Remember when the diagnosis around the National Development Plan was started, one of the issues that was mentioned was that it's actually difficult to fire in South Africa. But at times, that argument, the idea that making it easy to fire then will create more jobs, there isn't a direct connection in relation to that. You still have to make a case as to, do you really think that the main reason why we have got this high unemployment in South Africa is simply because it's difficult to fire people? It's a difficult case to make. It's quite a stretch, and I don't think that it will come out as actually being creative in this economy. You have to talk about the structure of the economy. You've got to talk about skilling younger people. You also have to talk about maybe other innovative means. It's not a straightforward argument that they're making. They're making a very complex argument that will be very difficult to sustain in the public space.
Ferial, I mean, there are plenty of economists who work for companies in Sandton that are going to come and say that's exactly what the DA should do, that, you know, if you can fire workers, you'll hire workers. Isn't there an issue, though, about how this lands? Does this not allow the DA to be painted as the party of the bosses, not the party of workers?
I don't think so. So there's another very interesting clause I found in the manifesto where the DA says that it will take the minimum wage down to the level of the old age pension, which is about 1,800 rand. It's much lower than the gazetted minimum that you're seeing at the moment. I think they've done their research amongst their core audience, and I moved through the stadium today, and I think it is the unemployed young black South African. So perhaps amongst the unions it may land as this is a party of the bosses. I think they're talking to a very different audience.
You're suggesting that, I mean, and people will know this, a middle class person will walk into Tembisa, for example, and immediately be accosted by people asking for jobs.
Sure.
And they won't say a minimum wage job. They won't even say 20 rand an hour. They say 100 rand a day. You're suggesting it's those people.
I found, I interviewed quite a few people in the stands, some of whom work for the DA and earn 200 rand a week, and they were saying, that's okay, we'll work. And I know you don't want a slave wage economy, but I did interview lots of the people. For me, that seems to be their major audience.
Ralph, the other issue around this was that the DA says the real problem for business is a lack of policy certainty. We'll get to land in a moment. The DA has plenty to say about land. I mean, are they making an accurate diagnosis that it's just about a lack of policy certainty? And you know all the arguments we see about the governing party and what's been happening in there. Is it just policy certainty that's really holding back investment both by foreign and South African companies?
Not necessarily. I mean, it is a big factor, no doubt. It's quite a factor. If you have policy certainty, at least you are eliminating one of the issues that actually make it very difficult for people to know where you are headed. But you just cannot shy away also from the fact that the reason why you have policy uncertainty is also because of some of the things that have been attempted in the past to try to ensure more participation, to actually pursue the market approach as well. Maybe we have not done it very well. We were quite certain in the past, and we still continue, inequality actually continue to grow in South Africa. Poverty, we still have a serious problem of poverty. What that means is that it's not just about managing things on the surface. It's also about dealing with structural problems as well. It's about dealing with a country where majority of people were excluded over the years, and from one generation to another, you inherit this kind of a problem. It's not just about managing things here and there. That's why for me, it's not just about just hiring and firing. It's not just about smaller, minor adjustment on the margins. You also need to take a serious question as to what will be the role of the state in all this. You are not going to develop South Africa and get participation by just pursuing purely the market approach. It will not work. It's not working elsewhere in the manner that I hear people actually say. You need clear policies, no doubt. You need the state that is capable, but you also need to be clear as to how far do you want the state to be involved. What kind of system do you actually want in place as well? Ownership structure in the economy, your SOEs and so forth. You need to deal with those things that you just cannot avoid. It's not a simple issue of tinkering here and there.
Ferial, there's also a comment about the unions. Now there's a lot of politics around unions at the moment, partly with Eskom, I think, in the mix. There was a COSATU strike last week. The DA would make it tougher for unions. They would want a secret ballot before a strike, which is sort of law now, sort of isn't. And then you've got this situation, and I wonder if something has maybe shifted with the balance of power of unions. I was struck last week by the national discussion when COSATU had a one-day strike, and so many people spoke to Talk Radio, they spoke to SAFM or wherever, and they were actually very opposed to COSATU. Do you think something's shifted with unions, that maybe the DA is actually stirring something here that might be damaging to unions?
I mean, their traditional view has always been that the labour market system makes it hard for employment. So you'll notice another point in their manifesto is that they would do away with the extension of centralised bargaining agreements to small and medium-sized enterprises, which is a huge bugbear in that sector. They feel like they can't afford those big business centralised agreements. So obviously they have done their research. I think they've recognised that the organised trade unions, the black ones at least are firmly in the ANC, even though they often say that they're not. And for me, they are speaking to a different audience. Are we going to talk about the BEE clauses?
Yes,
or
we
not?
can. I mean, they want to strike that. Yes.
So I feel like they really are speaking with like in a Janus-faced ways about BEE. So in the one part of the manifesto it says, yes, we do believe in racial redress, and on the other side it says, but we're not going to do BEE-styled, ANC-styled black economic empowerment. And I felt like that was perhaps one of the weak points of the manifesto that is a symbol of the deep contestation within the DA.
I'm going to come to the deep contestation around race and race-based redress, but I do want to just stick with black economic empowerment for a sec, Ralph. I mean, so is there not political hay or political ground to be covered by sort of saying BEE is ANC? Because, you know, all the headlines, the same people seem to benefit all the time. It seems to feed into a entrepreneurship type culture. I mean, is there not something in that for the DA to do that? You know, that headline, we'll scrap BEE as it currently is. Do you think it's that damaging?
Well, you know what's the problem? The problem is that BEE, affirmative action, those kind of, let me say, the basic principles upon which those policies are actually rooted, they're actually constitutional. They're actually constitutionally entrenched. Our constitution demands that some of those things are actually undertaken. So you cannot just outright say that the entire BEE or affirmative action need to be scrapped down. The debate will come down to how do you implement it? How do you craft it in a manner that it is not being hijacked by political elites? That's how you can come about it. Look, this thing is not just did not start in South Africa. The US used to have BEEs of some sort, procurement that favored the minorities, even after the New Deal and so forth. Some other East Asian countries have had some of this kind of a thing. Taiwan has had that kind of a form. It's all about if you employ such kind of a policy in a system where you've got weaker institutions like where we are, our institutions were still in their infancy, where one can say that affirmative action and BEE have had a very bad rap, not because of the essence of the policy, but because of the manner in which they were implemented. It becomes very difficult for any party to totally walk away from that, because it's more like a party saying that we are fine, we are not going to do anything about the continuing inequalities in societies that are still largely along racial lines. It's a very contentious issue. You have to reformulate it. If you just walk away from it, you are going to come across as very insensitive. I think this is one of the reasons why the DA always struggle to deal with this question, to deal with the issue as to what extent should we actually use race as a form of redress or as a proxy to bring about equality or a better society. It's a difficult thing for them. Even for the ANC, it's also difficult. By the way, some of these policies by the ANC, some of the affirmative action policies in government, they will fail in court, because the court will say good policy, good thinking, constitutionally defensible, but bad implementation path. So maybe that's where the DA can come in, and where they want to say that, look, we can implement this thing in a manner that we are not going to stoic race relations. We'll do it in a modern democratic principle, in a manner that it is constitutionally defensible.
Ferial, isn't the problem that the DA has? There's obviously, it's a political party, so there's more than one problem. But one of the things is that it's trying to do something that hasn't actually been done in South Africa since possibly the 1950s, and the formation of what we could see as the Congress movement, the ANC. Yes. That is actually trying to appeal to large groups of different constituencies in a country that is literally defined by racial inequality. That's actually very difficult to do.
Very hard. And I guess a lot of what the DA is going through at the moment that makes the headlines, not manifesto talk, is growth pains. It's become a broad church. You can see the launch today was full of razzmatazz. It was a much bigger DA launch than I've seen before. So I do think that we're seeing their growing pains in full view, Stephen.
Let's talk a little bit about land and sort of see what Mmusi Maimane said about land. It was a major part of his speech, his discussion about land. He said today that his party would make sure there was no expropriation without compensation.
I also have a dream of making all South Africans owners of their home with full title, both in urban and rural communities. It's a system. I don't want a place in this country where people are at the mercy of the state. We don't just oppose the Constitution for the sake of it, the amending of the Constitution for the sake of it. We want to ensure that Section 25 is protected in the Constitution so that our citizens can become owners, not tenants of the state. We have shown more than everywhere that we can deliver land reform within the Constitution, and our people know that they can settle compensation through our legal system rather than allowing politicians to decide who will own land and who can't own land. We will never again enslave our people to be people who work for the state. I would rather have our people be owners of their land. This is indeed true freedom.
Maimane, the leader of the Democratic Alliance at the party's election manifesto launched today.